coming to this AGM's briefing on safety and operations. I'd like to welcome Nick Careen, our SVP Operations, Safety and Security here at IATA, who will be taking you through an update on sort of safety and operations. Afterwards, we'll do a Q&A. As always, preferred language would be English, but of course, para los hispanohablantes lo podemos hacer en español y para los brasileños el portugués está bon ainda.
Et tu parles français aussi.
Ah oui, le français, naturellement aussi, on peut faire le français pour ceux qui veulent parler le français. Okay, with that, Nick, over to you, and let's hear what's new in safety and operations.
Okay, I'm going to go through these slides relatively briskly because none of this stuff is actually going to be that new to you. Some of it you would have already heard. Perhaps a little bit of a different spin on it, but you would have heard this week already. So we chose to sort of illustrate that given the current complexity in the operational world, the domino effect it has on various aspects of aviation. So just looking at conflicts and a domino effect. So I'm going to touch a little bit about the impacts it has on aerospace. I'll touch on what it does to safety. I'll touch on the impacts it has on fuel, slots, and a little bit on supply chain as well. So, no big surprise in terms of airspace. You look at this graph. This is a picture of before the conflict in Ukraine and the Middle East. So in May 11th of 2021 and on the 15th of May in 2026. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what that's done from an aviation standpoint. What it has done, I guess to put a finer point on it, 3.5 million square kilometers of airspace has been removed. So basically an area slightly larger than India has either been closed, restricted, or can be avoided completely. What it's done to us from a flight distance perspective, it has had a large effect on Indian airspace, Middle East airspace in particular, closed, impacting flights from Southern Europe to India. Roughly impact is somewhere in the range of 5 to 20%, depending on where you're operating from. So in this case, we use Rome to Delhi. That's added an additional 19% to the en route time. And we also use Istanbul to Bombay, and that has a 6% increase just on average. So not only has it added time, it added costs, fuel, crew, etc. The average cost increase is around $10 to $45 per person. And anyone that was watching Willie's speech yesterday and the small margins we have in that business, that basically in many cases eats up whatever profitability there would have been on some of these markets. Another example that we use is more recent. This is in April, a January flight. What it was from Dammam to Muscat. We basically added an hour once the Middle East conflict had gone into full force. What does it do? It obviously really complicates the safety environment we operate in. We need to do more increased amount of risk assessments. I'll get into that a little bit in a bit. We've seen an increase in navigation interference and GNSS, which I've spoken about numerous times in this and other opportunities to speak about it. And also, which is relatively new, drones. Especially since the Russian-Ukrainian war and then subsequently what's happening in the Middle East. The use of drones has increased dramatically. We've also seen some of those impacts, which I'll touch on in a second. So, how do you operate in this mess? It's not simple. It's rather dynamic. And first and foremost, it starts with the states. And some are really, really good at it, and some are not so good at it. But the states need to do a risk assessment in terms of it's their primary responsibility to say if it's safe or not. That information is then passed on to the regulator, and the regulator will translate that information from the state and usually put that out into a notice to airmen or issue a safety bulletin which the airlines will then perform their own route level risk assessments. And then the operations centers on a daily basis, on a flight plan level, will continue to operate and manage. And that's why in some cases you might see examples where flights have actually taken off and en route and then turn around and divert because something has changed in terms of the threat picture. So that's how airlines are managing it at the moment. And like I said, for the most part, it works really well, but you know, there is always room for improvement. I won't harp on GNSS interference because I've done specific updates on this in the past, but what we are seeing is an increase in the amount of GNSS interference. 71,000 plus reports, 2.1 million signal losses of GPS, 31.8 million abnormal satellite navigation events, which is basically giving the erroneous information to the aircraft in terms of proximity. And we've seen a significant number of NOTAMs issued as a result of it, where Eastern Europe, the Middle East, India, Pakistan, Southeast Asia, mainland China, and for a short period of time in around the Caribbean, primarily Venezuela, which was something very new to this part of the world, which was indicative of the amount of reaction we received from the carriers operating here. It's an issue, it's a problem, and it continues to be a threat to the operating environment. I mentioned earlier drones, so we're seeing more and more of it. They're involved in conflict does not take place without them, as we've seen. And we've also seen some immediate issues, the most recent being in Poland, where a number of airports were impacted by drone activity, creating significant closures of the airspace and the airport, and causing significant amount of delays. So we need states to step up. We need stronger coordination, which isn't happening to the degree it should be. We need timely information, which also isn't happening to the degree it should be. We need more guidance to operators in terms of what and how to operate in an environment like this. And we need better response plans to protect civil aviation, whether that's in the form of geofencing, integration into the ATM network, and sensors on board these drones to be able to allow for conflict resolution when and if it does occur. Fuel, not immune to that either. So I mentioned earlier the fact that we fly circuitous routes to places because we're not allowed to go through certain airspace because it's been closed or restricted. We're also subject to price shock, which we've all seen as a result of the conflict in the Middle East. Supply uncertainty, which we've also seen. A lot of was hyperbole in the news, but so certainly there was some issues in terms and continues to be concerns around supply availability. And then obviously operational flexibility is what we're striving for, and closing airspace has a significant cost to operations. So what can a trade association like us do? Well, not a lot. We can squawk a lot. We can identify the problems, and we can ask for government relief when and where possible. We just most recently saw an example in India where some extensions of a $1 billion fund was created to help lessen the blow to carriers in that country. However, a lot of other states have done nothing. One example, which was is actually very relevant in North America, where Canada and the US do this on a regular basis, not so much anywhere else in the world, is the availability of Jet A. So the Americans use Jet A. The global standard is Jet A1. The difference is freezing point. Really means not a lot. It can be dealt with from an operational standpoint. And anti-static additives in Jet A1 that isn't in Jet A but can be added after the fact, which many carriers do anyway. So, and there's a lot of availability of Jet A. Now, whether or not countries like Spain want to buy it or not, well, that's a different story, but it is there. So we have worked with IATA, and we have put out guidance recently in terms of the availability and ability to use Jet A in Europe and other markets if need be, should the supply chain become a challenge in terms of availability. The other thing that we've been beating our heads against the wall with states has been on the justified non-use of slots. So those, I won't bore everybody, but it's an 80-20 rule for those that aren't familiar with it. So in slot controlled airports, and in normal times, if you don't fly that 80%, you're going to lose the slot. Well, when there's a fuel shortage, when there's a war, when there's a conflict zone, we need some flexibility. You can't just expect us to fly normally when normal operation is just not the case. For the most part, we've been pretty successful in attaining that. What we would like to have is a little bit more predictability in terms of the length. So we have been applying, not looking for regulatory relief, but perhaps an extension in terms of it being not only for 30 days or 3 months, but for 6 months, that the airlines can plan accordingly. So we continue to lobby on behalf of the industry to make sure that justified non-use of slots, or JANUS, which you may have heard, is top of mind for all the regulators and all jurisdictions in which we are in slot controlled environments. I won't beat this to death because Willie had his run at engine manufacturers and supply chain multiple times over the last couple of days, but that too plays a part. More specifically in terms of conflict zones, movement of things, serviceability of aircraft, even availability of MROs, which may exist in some of these locations which you can't access, has a part to play in terms of the impact it has on the overall operation itself, and airlines have to keep that in consideration. Defense demand. We didn't talk about that in the last couple of days, but we're competing with them. So the supply chain is challenged not only because of some of the issues that we've seen on the engine front. I won't name I won't name Pratt & Whitney and CFM, but in case you're wondering. But defense demand, just to put a little bit of a finer point on, in 2025, defense spending is $2.9 trillion. That's the 11th consecutive year of growth in defense spending. We compete with them for the same things that we need, they need. Who wins that argument? I think we all know who gets the upper hand in terms of where, but that impacts MRO capability, it impacts the availability of spares, it impacts the availability of engineering, the labor force, all those things. So the cascading effect of the defense spend, which is continuing to grow. Europe, as an example, is up 14% year over year, and will continue to grow as well. So we're watching that closely because of the impact it does have on our ability to be able to bring in new fleet and address the current shortages that we have today. So keeping aviation moving during a crisis is not an easy thing to do in any way, shape, or form. But safety is number one. We not bullshit. That is the number one priority of our business. It's never lost on any carrier in the room that this is the number one priority. We look for flexibility because we have to be flexible. So using Europe and picking on them, probably not a good time to be looking at trying to enhance consumer regulations like EU 261 when the kind of problems that airlines are facing at the moment. Supply chain is going to continue to be an issue for quite a few years to come, one would suggest, and obviously better coordination in terms of reducing disruption, which really comes down to better communication from governments and regulators so that we can plan accordingly. Switching gears a little bit. So last year, some of you may recall, this is something we'll do every year, well, at least as long as I'm around, is a B2C campaign. So IATA has not been known to do very many business to consumer activity. Last year we did lithium batteries. It's still actually being widely circulated. It's one of our most successful campaigns in terms of communication in simple ways to be able to illustrate what you can and cannot take on board an aircraft. And we've done all kinds of things around standard setting and stuff in the background, which is all good, but actually education to our consumers so that they understand why it is that we're vigilant around don't bring your batteries, or don't put your batteries in your luggage, etc. So that was a very successful campaign. Last September, on the sidelines of the ICAO assembly, Brian Bedford, who's the head of FAA in the US, asked if we would consider helping them out on communication around evacuations. I thought, wow, that would be a good one for something like this as well. We already have a plan for next year's one, which will be, I think will be interesting as well. But so we agreed to pursue this, and so we have worked with the IATA and the FAA, and we've put a campaign that's more about getting off aircraft in a suitable amount of time. So anybody that has a social media account has seen this. Nobody can seem to follow instructions. Everybody in this room has flown here. Everybody in this room has heard the announcements, and very few people follow them. We have some examples, but you know what? Actually, before I came in today, I said, I'll ask AI. Give me some examples of when the process actually was followed. I got 3. One in Haneda in 2024, which some may remember. US Airways that don't even exist anymore in the early 2000s. And an Air France incident in Toronto in 2005, which I remember distinctly because I was working at the airline at the time. But nonetheless, it's a problem. So we did a survey to try to get a benchmark in terms of where we are, what we're doing. I'll get into some of the details, but the aircraft are certified to get off the airplane in 90 seconds. That will only work if we all play our part. Oh, I just muted? Okay. So this is a example from Airbus. No bags, no wheelchairs, no hockey sticks. So it can be done. So we did the survey, we asked some questions. So passengers underestimate how fast an evacuation needs to be done. So 18% new aircraft evacuation procedures are designed for 90-second safety benchmark. That's a pretty low number. 38% think it would take longer than that. 80% say they know what to do. 61% correctly say they should leave all personal items behind. So 4 in 10 passengers don't even realize that it's an expectation of them to leave their shit behind. 60% say they would be less likely to take baggage if essential small items were already on their person. So the campaign, which you will hear a lot of, as we plan to flog this as much as we possibly can, and I have a short video to show you in a second. So save a life, not a bag. Every second counts in an evacuation. The message is simple. Listen to the crew. Leave your stuff on board. Don't stop to take pictures. Keep aisles and exits clear. Do not take bags on evacuation slides, and be ready. Pretty simple stuff.
During an emergency evacuation, every second counts. Listen carefully, move quickly, but most importantly, leave your belongings behind. Not following these rules can endanger everyone. Let's see some of these behaviors in the wild.
Ah yes, the lowland gorilla. Remarkable for its size and its extraordinary ability to ignore everything around it. pay attention whenever the crew are giving instructions. The tortoise is by nature unhurried. Here mid-aisle, it has chosen this moment to locate its belongings. Behind it, passengers are forced to wait. This costs everyone precious seconds. Shh. Look closely. The leopard, keen-eyed, patient, observes, choosing to capture the moment rather than escape it. Don't film. Move. The rhinoceros, capable of great strength, and yet here pinned between a carry-on and an overwing exit. Luggage becomes a barrier for everyone on the way out. The penguin takes to the slide with characteristic enthusiasm, but catastrophic consequences. Hard bags cause injuries and damage. The owl, wise as ever, has thought ahead. Passport, keys, medication, small items, secured to the body or in a pocket. Every flight, every time.
An emergency doesn't have to be a wild process. Your crew will guide you. Follow their instructions.
Every second counts. Save a life, not a bag.
Thank you very much.
And now we're ready to take your questions. Yeah, please raise your hand and state what media you're from. And I think Andreas in the front row, you were first, so. The mic is on its way.
Thank you, Andreas, aviation journalist from Germany. I think that's very interesting, this topic about bags, leaving behind your bags. I wonder, did you also do, or did the industry in general do some psychological assessment, like what's even the reason for people to do that? Is it just a habit, so you don't leave the aircraft without taking whatever you have before you leave, whatever hurry you might be in an emergency? Or is it like the reflex of, but I cannot leave my valuables up there, so I have to get them out? I mean, is there anything psychologically that can be done to influence others, like fundamentally, to kind of try to think differently? What's the core of it?
Yeah, so the video itself, human behavior specialists were involved in the creation of the video. Why people act that way, behave that way, I think it's probably more education than anything else. You know, human nature is to leave, you know, my laptop, my personal belongings, my passport. And I think the message is, you know, if we educate and continue to drive the message home that if those things that are really, really important, you know, it's like when you leave the house. I do it. I don't know if you guys are like that, but when I leave the house, I ask myself, do I have my wallet? Do I have my passport? Everything else I can purchase. I don't want to, but I can. So, you know, the message of having those personal things that are on you or available to take quickly, it's a sound message to have. It's no different than you know, the simple message around, like I mentioned in the beginning, on lithium batteries. It's just common sense, really.
But it's against human reflex, and normally you just flee if there's danger, but these people don't. So
No.
I'll go to Careen
You're going to ask me about air traffic control, aren't you? Yeah.
Yes, Careen Smith, Business Day, South Africa. Anything you can say about Southern Africa, South Africa, that's when my ears pick up. Thank you so much.
Is that an actual question?
Yeah, I think that is a question. I mean, is there anything on South Africa or Africa in terms of what, I guess,
I'm so sorry, to put it in context. Earlier today there was another briefing. I asked a question about comment on, for instance, there were air traffic control incidents or related incidents recently, and that puts the question mark. And if you have any comment on Southern Africa.
Air traffic control has not been that big of an issue, actually, in that part of the world. Probably have more infrastructure problems than you do air navigation, although a single aviation network in that continent would make some sense at some point in time. We would also need it in Europe, which is not happening either. Some of the safety challenges that we've had have primarily been in the US, really, and one of our higher safety risks in terms of runway incursions and excursions have actually happened in a very mature market. None of them have been the same. Some of them are workloads. Some of them are just errors which happen in the system. Are we concerned? Concern would be a big word. I think what the FAA's plan under Brian's leadership, separating out the safety mechanism from the FAA into a separate agency, to investment that they've secured from a government funding perspective to increase the amount of controllers and to invest in technology, I'm pretty comfortable with that. I think if there's anything, it's not so much a safety concern as to the lack of efficient management of airspace, which is the bigger concern, where estimates are somewhere around 20 to 30% of airspace is not being managed properly because of either lack of technology or lack of proper handoffs. I hate to pick on Europe as a classic example. And I guess the other area that would be obvious in terms of air traffic management would be the seasonal labor disruptions that we tend to have to endure in Europe on a regular basis.
Okay, we come to the middle, to the gentleman in the pink shirt. Yeah.
Hello, Lawrence Slater from The Times. You gave 3 examples of where it worked and everyone evacuated well. Do you have any examples of where it didn't work well? And what was the most egregious bit of behaviour that you've seen in this campaign?
I would be remiss if I started naming airlines on where it didn't work, because that would be unfair. But there are many examples of where, and it's all been, examples that were in the video. People taking off with their bags, some with strollers, and some with anything that you could think of, every personal belonging that they could think of, were taking off, simply not following crew instructions. And the examples that where it actually worked were where crew were provided as an example of being exceptional in being given the instructions, and for the people to follow them. They used the example where it worked in Haneda. The airplane was on fire. I think that maybe even had something to do with people wanting to get off it faster, right? Because a lot of times you'll have, it could be you pull off to the side because you had an engine that kicked out on takeoff, and you did a rejected takeoff, and you don't see a visible issue. But if you've got smoke, people tend to get off the airplane quicker for some reason.
Okay, we'll just move down the aisle.
Hi, Gwyn Thompson from The Guardian. On that same theme, then, has there been an incident where people have lost their lives and it's been described as people slowly evacuating? And also, beyond that, I just wondered, given what we're talking about with disruptive passengers, would you favour a system where people could be fined or penalised or punished for taking hand luggage off in an emergency?
Okay, for the first loss of life and for evacuations, it's very hard to. There have been loss of lives from inhalation and those things. Whether that is associated with getting off an aircraft fast enough, that's never been determined to be the case, but could. In terms of disruptive passengers, the question was on unruly behaviors, right?
No, my question was, would you favour similar kind of penalties for people who fail to follow instructions and do take their bags off, the kind of people you showed on the video?
Yeah, if we could implement them. Problem is that we have penalties for unruly behavior as well, and that doesn't necessarily change behavior sometimes. But I think penalties they are somewhat effective, but unless they're implemented on a consistent basis, then they kind of lose their effectiveness. So I think let's start with education first and see if that moves the dial. And I think it could progress, because there are regulators that are interested in having something a little bit more finite in terms of behavior that are required to get that 90 seconds in place. And ideally, we wouldn't want to be evacuating, right?
Stay on this side, then we'll move to the other side of the room.
Tomasz Niedzielski, Orient Aviation. I want to ask you about a question maybe about theft on board, which seems to affect carriers in Asia Pacific region. And social media have some kind of instructions for passengers how to take care of their belongings. So is it a problem that IATA sees? Is it persistent?
Is that pet soundboard?
Theft.
Theft.
And
Okay.
luggage theft.
People stealing.
Yeah, I mean, we just had a session in Qatar with a number of carriers. I think there was 30 carriers that participated in it. It was specific to this issue. It does tend to be on certain markets. Asia is by and large the largest area of concern. It tends to be organized. And so we're trying to figure out how best to manage it, share best practices. Some of the airlines are better at it than others in terms of managing it, policing the cabin, including having security on board to monitor the activity to ensure that it's reduced. It's not rampant, but it's enough that enough for the airlines to request that we would have a special session on it, which I said it was 3 months ago in Qatar. And at the moment, it's just sharing best practices. There's no intention to do any further interventions at this point, but I guess we'll see if our carriers have seen an improvement or not by implementing some of the carriers' ideas where some are more successful than others.
Okay, so we'll go the gentleman in the front row on this side, and then move back.
Hugues Honoré with Agence France Presse. In the beginning of your presentation, you said that some states were better and some less good at assessing risks for airlines to fly over certain countries or doing certain operations. Can you name them?
I'd like to. I'd really like to name them, but that wouldn't be. I probably would be my last day at IATA, but because I still have to work with them. Nobody does it on purpose. There's no. If and when it happens, it tends to be because they're not mature enough. And the good thing about that is we have lots of regulators. The FAA, EASA, are very good at providing information to their carriers, whereas home nations may not be as quick to do. And all the airlines have the benefit of that information. So we have a system in place that allows for that messages. So notice the airmen that are issued by Germany for their carriers operating into country X, all airlines will have access to that information. So when that happens and some country puts out a notice and the country that's actually involved does not, we will have a conversation with them to understand how they assess their risk and why they didn't versus someone else doing it. But I wouldn't name and shame at this point because that wouldn't be counterproductive.
I think Dina, you were next. Yeah.
Hello, good morning. Dina Kamel from the National in Abu Dhabi. Just a couple of questions on the situation in the Middle East, particularly at the beginning of the war. I'm wondering, given the operational conditions that the airlines there have had to work under, particularly the pilots and the cabin crew, if there was any conversations with the airlines to advocate for more mental health services for their staff, particularly as the current systems don't really encourage people coming forward to talk about that, and if you're working on some programs there. And then just a second quick question, if I may, on seeing at the beginning of the war that some airlines made choices to continue flying through so-called safe air corridors, and then quickly suspend and reinstate those flights when things started dropping from the sky right at the airport. So how did you assess those safety procedures and choices looking at it from outside?
So that's your last question first. That's the way the system should work. If airlines are assessing risk based on the information that they have, they plan to operate, they hope to operate, and if something changes, they don't. And that's simply the way it shall work. Safe air corridors, it did work for repatriation, but not for scheduled flying. And that's really the intent, is to be able to get people out. It's not necessarily for us to maintain a commercial schedule. And that's humanitarian. Is that what you mean?
No, sorry, that's not what I meant. What I meant was that they made the choices to fly at circumstances where there were missiles or drones or whatever that had been dropping at the airport, and then they had to backtrack on those decisions, suspend the flights, come back, divert, whatever. So, you know, from a safety perspective, from the outside, an objective point of view, how did you assess those procedures and choices that were made at that time?
I think that, you know, use the GCC countries as an example. They're pretty robust in terms of managing their risks. They've been operating in a hostile environment for quite some time, and you know, from our standpoint, they have a good handle on this. You know, it all boils down to communication, right? If certain countries aren't notifying that they're about to bomb your airport and you're planning normal operations, then you know they did the right thing. They didn't operate. They diverted us. That unfortunately happens. But then schedules were removed until things stabilized and operations began again. And they're still not at full operations for a reason. And there's certain parts of the FIRs in the region that are still closed. And that will remain until you know things we finally see a full agreement and settlement. You know, Kuwait, Oman, Iraq, Iran. It's just the nature of the operation there, and I think they're all doing a wonderful job actually, considering there's been no accidents and incidents. So that's the measure. In terms of mental health services, that's up to each individual airline, and I would suggest that if and when you know we're in a just culture, especially in you know all these airlines that are in the GCC that are strong proponents of SMS, that's available if the crew asks for it. I'd be surprised if it was not.
Okay, I think we have Peter and then Oliver in the front row. Oliver and whatever you decide.
I think I'll go first. When we spoke about the evacuation situation last year, you were saying that there's a variability in response between people from different countries, different cultures. Some seem to be more observant. I know you don't have an exhaustive database because that would require evacuations in every country, but can you address that a little? Because it does seem to vary in terms of how people respond to authority, perhaps. And the other thing is, we wouldn't have had this 30 years ago when we didn't have bags in overhead bins. So I'm wondering, might there not be a solution where if there is an evacuation, the pilot simply presses a central locking button, the bins lock and people can't get their bags. And they're told before the flight that that won't be the case, so you better get off. There's no point trying to get your bags.
I think we all know cultural diversity exists, and you know some parts of the world are more apt to follow rules than others. I don't think I need to explain that any more than that. I'm certainly not going to start identifying countries where they're less likely to follow rules than others, but I think you can do that on your own. But as far as, that's not a bad idea. A locking mechanism in an overhead bin, I've never heard that suggestion being made, actually. I'm probably one to give less control of things to pilots, but I mean, in this case, maybe that's not a bad idea. It's never come up. Could it be done? Possibly, could be done. But I think, again, the approach of the industry at first would be to let's see if we can educate and see if that changes behavior. If we don't see the type of behavior changes that we're expecting to see, then we'll have to be a little bit more draconian, which could be penalties, and it could be something as simple as a hard stop locking mechanism on overhead bin, which is fine on an aircraft that doesn't allow you to put things underneath the seat in front of you, which we know is also an issue. So I don't know if it would actually solve the entire problem. It could actually make it even worse with people fighting with overhead bins to try to open them. So
yeah. Tell them before it's fine.
Electric shocks have a tendency to be a little bit more.
I think he's going to charge you for that if you do use it. I expect that we'd be invoicing it. I just wanted to reflect on the Air Canada crash or the fatality with the Air Canada in March. Is that something that, obviously it happened in March, so it's still, you know, investigation still going. Is that something that you or the international sort of community, if you like, have reflected on? Do you think it's happening more? Is it something that you're concerned about? I just wonder if any thoughts on that, really.
Yeah, well, first of all, that airline is my former airline, so I, that day, spoke to the dispatcher that was working the shift, because I know them, and so it did hit pretty close to home, and Janet Wallace is Air Canada, posted, so it hits you hard when stuff like that happens. So for me personally, it probably had a little bit more of a, meant perhaps a little bit more than it would to someone who's looking at it on the periphery. It's an incredibly unfortunate incident. The final report from the NTSB isn't out yet. We do know that the truck in question was not equipped with sensors for on board, and it's not a regulatory requirement in the US. Could that have prevented this from happening? Perhaps. Radio saturation seems to be the message of not transferring across that active runway. Did not meet the driver, or he did not hear it. And the pilots are at a point of no return. And so there was very little that they could have done to avoid the situation. It's one of those, what do you do to improve that? Well, workload may become a factor in terms of that night and that shift. We'll see what the NTSB says. Beacons on equipment that are transferring active runways probably would be a recommendation in the end. We'll see. I think most industry would be supportive of that. There are some parts of the world where that is a regulatory requirement. So yeah, it is a concern because any accident of that nature is a significant concern. But is it something that's systemic? Luckily, no. But there is, like any accident, something we can learn about it. What's good about it is that in the case of the US, they will do a thorough investigation, and we will get recommendations. That unfortunately is not the case in some countries around the world. And the way we improve is from learning from these unfortunate incidents.
Okay, I think we'll go to the outer side here and then to the other side. I think Betsy.
Buenos días, en español.
Okay, lo voy a traducir.
Tengo una curiosidad. Si se da la evacuación de una aeronave, ¿cómo se hace en el caso de personas, por ejemplo, que utilizan sillas de rueda o que tienen movilidad reducida?
Okay, para una evacuación con pasajeros de movilidad reducida. Okay. Okay. So her question is on what are evacuation procedures for passengers with reduced mobility? So how do we account for that in evacuating aircraft?
Or do we remain seated and assisted by the flight attendants?
Bueno, normalmente se quedan en su silla y lo van a asistir los tripulantes a evacuar del avión. Hay proceduras por esto. ¿Vale? Gracias. Okay, now we'll go to the other side of the room, and I think then we'll probably take the last few and close the session.
Your Spanish is excellent.
Oh, thank you.
Marcin Walków, Money.pl from Poland. I would like to come back to unruly passengers again, because some passengers face aggression when they recline their seat from people sitting just behind them. So
are you one of them?
No,
Okay.
not yet. But I think that's fate of all of us. So what is the official statement or guidance industry-wise from IATA? Do passengers have the right to recline their seat against the will of others? And how should airlines and their crew react in conflict situations in this context?
There's no, I mean, we don't have an SOP for whether or not you can recline your seat. I think some airlines have actually restricted the ability to recline seats to avoid confrontation. You see it more on low-cost carriers than you would on a full-service airline. I think it's up to the individual airline to make that decision. doubt ever would see IATA put a procedure or a policy out that said you weren't allowed to recline the seat. I suggest shaking the shit out of it. That usually deals with the problem pretty quickly. But no, I think it's really up to individual airlines. It's not something that we will ever engage in at IATA, unless I guess if it becomes a more and more of an issue. But seat reclining is not the problem. Over consumption of alcohol seems to be the problem. And if you ask Michael O'Leary, we shouldn't be serving alcohol in airports. But if that's the case, Michael will start flying private, I guess.
So last round, I mean, talking about drinks, last rounds, Andreas, I guess, one more question from the front row.
I want to come back to some other important safety issues of the last 2 years, or also currently. First of all, you mentioned the lithium campaign last year, lithium battery campaign, and then of course interacts with the power bank policies that have been changed by many airlines recently. Can you give a kind of an update on the lithium and power bank front? Has that been mitigated in a way now, or more mitigated than before? Has your campaign worked in a way?
We have seen less incidents. So if that's an early indicator that, and I think airlines have gotten really good at providing information, so you get those announcements on board aircraft now that we didn't get before. Same thing actually for turbulence, and through education, through communication, through announcements, keep your seatbelt on, those types of things. I think because of those actions, we've been able to see a reduction in incidents. Some airlines have chosen to go a little bit further in terms of their restrictions on power banks, and that's fine too. We have the standard, but if they want to go a little bit further with that, that's perfectly acceptable. So we've actually have seen a decrease. And as far as next year's B2C campaign, we haven't written anything in stone, so if you have any suggestions on what you think we should do, we consider it. All open to any and all ideas that you may or may not have. And thank you very much for putting up with me for the last 45 minutes, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Well, thank you, and nothing to add to that. And I think we left like 5 minutes late, but we got here on time, right?
There you go.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.